So our speaker number one will be Tai Tan, answering the question, Amanda Miranda is elected leader of Boko Haram, and using her wonderful insights, the paramilitary overthrows Bola Tinubu's government. What steps should Amanda take to stabilize Nigeria and establish Boko Haram's presence within the country?
One of Xi Jinping's most famous quotes is this: "The East is rising and the West is declining." Pretty funny, considering that when you translate Boko Haram, Nigeria's largest jihadist group's name, into English, you get Western education is a sin. So, as Amanda looks to take control of Nigeria and stabilize it, pushing away the West and invoking the East may be the best path forward. Because, as Modern China by Rana Mitter details, China succeeded under the CCP due to centralizing their government, creating protection for the people under a singular party that they supported. Thus, the World Bank furthers on October 8th of 2025 that Nigeria, now being taken over and pushed out of Bola Tinubu and toward the government of Boko Haram under Miranda takes control, it's clear that they need a strong central government to get Nigeria off its feet, because democracy has clearly failed them. And so it's when considering that in the Eastern world, stability lies not in freedom of the people, but rather in centralizing a government that can guarantee their protections, that the future of Nigeria demands we ask today's hypothetical. Amanda Miranda is elected leader of Boko Haram, and using her wonderful insights, is able to overthrow the government of Bola Tinubu. What steps should Amanda take to stabilize Nigeria and establish Boko Haram's preeminence in the country? The answer is clear. Amanda should look to take control and authority across Nigeria to make the country great again in three ways. By first, controlling urban areas. Second, by culling internal factionalism. And finally, by addressing socioeconomic disparities. Now, first, for Amanda, taking control of Nigeria lies not in Boko Haram's rural areas, but rather swiftly controlling urban ones. The first way in which Nigeria can take control and stabilize the country under Amanda is by emphasizing and controlling urban areas. As the New York Times explains on April 24th of 2019, although Boko Haram has a strong control of rural areas, using their agro rangers to attack farmers all across northeast Nigeria, the real challenge for Boko Haram will be swiftly garnering power in the urban centers like Lagos. As Amanda takes control, looking to China as an example for to control urban areas will be the best example of coercive diplomacy. As a Brookings report in April of 2020 explains, Boko Haram should do what they do best: attacking with guns. Going straight into urban centers, Boko Haram should attack in urban blockades, taking control over major cities like Lagos and controlling them. Next, Amanda should look to hold coercive elections, ones where she gets school kids across Nigeria to be soldiers and police to keep the elections totally fair for her to win. That way, not only will Amanda be taking control of urban areas, but also she'll be preventing a youth-led revolution that's taking control in other countries like Madagascar right now. And so, as Amanda looks to be the new king of Nigeria, taking real control by invoking China and controlling urban areas is the first step she must take. Yet, second, from the CCP to Boko Haram, internal division plagues them. The second step that Amanda must take in order to ensure that Boko Haram is a preeminent government that stabilizes Nigeria is by culling internal division. Now, as an article written by the Terrorism and Political Violence Journal on March 13th of 2019 explains, within Boko Haram, a major issue, despite being a prominent jihadist group, is internal splintering, in which strongman leaders are trying to go off on their own and control Boko Haram from the sidelines. In order for Amanda to truly control Nigeria, she must ensure that Boko Haram is a stable government, one in which splinter groups don't try to tear it apart. Thus, as the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists on April 24th of 2025 recommends, Boko Haram should look to China on how to control a government under a singular party by invoking the CCP. All Amanda must do is start destroying every single opposition party, either by assassinating their leaders or exiling them off to the middle of nowhere. Additionally, Amanda must ensure that Boko Haram is cared about, and by blocking off all human rights NGOs from joining the country, she can start to build mass detention camps and political indoctrination campaigns, ones that ensure that all the people think about is Boko Haram and just how great Amanda is. If Boko Haram wants to become the singular leader of Nigeria, ensuring that there's no internal factionalism is a must. And if she follows China's model, there's no way she won't succeed. Yet, finally, Amanda really wants to help the Nigerian people. After all, she wants to be their hero. The final thing that Amanda must do in order to ensure that Nigeria will be stable under Boko Haram's preeminence is to address the country's disparities of socioeconomic destruction. Now, as the Associated Press laments on November 24th of this year, right now, Nigerians are suffering under an economic crisis caused by Bola Tinubu. With inflation at 30%, 130 million people on the brink of poverty, and little access to energy, electricity, food, water, and healthcare, the people of Nigeria are suffering under immense burdens. This is Amanda tries to save the country. She must address the fundamental issues the country are facing, not by invoking Western ideals of democracy, rather by looking to the Eastern standards set by China. As further adapted by Modern China by Rana Mitter, she explains that the best forum for Boko Haram and other countries like those in the East to adopt is early-stage communism. Boko Haram should look to invoke support from China to develop modern technology to grow agriculture at an astonishing rate, ones that feed the country. Additionally, Amanda should invest into local factories, ones that not only create jobs, but also create small-scale communalism, a form of early-stage communism that ensures that everyone in Nigeria will eventually have equal outcome. And so, when Mao Zedong once said, "We want to build a new China," he succeeded. For Amanda to do the same, she has to say the same words. We want to build a new Nigeria, one in which the ideals of China's foundations and Eastern educations reject all of the West and put Nigeria at the top. And so, when we look back at today's hypothetical, we see that Amanda, despite trying to create a country, has to find a way to stabilize and ensure Boko Haram's preeminence. So, through my answer, we saw that Amanda must take control and authority over Nigeria by first, controlling urban areas. Second, by culling internal factionalism. And finally, by creating and ensuring that socioeconomic disparities are finally addressed. And so, the East truly is rising and the West is declining. For Boko Haram's statement of Western education is sin to become truth, Amanda must invoke the East and ensure that the principles of Boko Haram and Nigeria are finally up to her own accord.
Hi, congrats on a great speech. I just have a few questions for you. So, for your first point, it was taking control over the urban areas. What's to say that there won't be backlash from the Nigerian people when it comes to taking control over those urban areas? And
Yeah,
how would Amanda combat that?
I totally understand that. That's why I said what Boko Haram should do is just use guns. If you threaten the people with weapons, you scare them away and force trust upon them. So that's the best thing Boko Haram can do and the most feasible thing for what they already do.
All right. For your second point for internal division, I believe, um, how how would destroying opposite parties exactly help Amanda's vision if instead only destroying opposite parties would create more opposition in her own group? Would it not just create more enemies for her in Boko Haram instead of having outside enemies?
Well, destroying internal division means attacking the inside of her party, like those bad guys and other actors who want to take control. I mean, obviously, Amanda should attack those other opposition parties that are sprawling up, but also start culling her own party, similar to how Xi Jinping's doing, where he's getting rid of top officials, even though they've trusted him because they're corrupt or not working in the government anymore. Kind of getting rid of everyone who's against Amanda would be the best way forward for Amanda to really make Boko Haram one unified party.
But if she's seen as a great leader, then won't there automatically be more people who want more power? So is there any way to truly get rid of your enemies like that?
Well, I mean, you can kill them. That's about it. I mean, people will always want more power. So if you just kill the guys who are bad, you kind of do good for yourself.
All right. For your third point for socioeconomic problems, what's to say that the early stages of what's to say that the Nigerian people would be against the early stages of communism? I know you brought up guns in your first point, but there are still going to be protests, no?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we turn the youth into police and start policing each other. I mean, if the best way to get people to agree to something is to force it on them and then make them finally start liking it. So that's probably what I would do.
All right. Good job again.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Our second speaker is Samedh Davuluri, answering the question, Sebastian Assadi leaks evidence that the entirety of OPEC is having difficulty extracting oil, causing speculation and massive energy price increases. How should President Trump respond to quell panic and maintain price stability?
Donald Trump's first 7 months in presidency have been every extempore's dream. From first, tweeting out messages on his own social media app that make for great stories. Like last week, whenever President Trump tweeted he wanted to become best friends with the president of China, to later tweet that he planned on increasing tariffs on the country by 75%. Or second, the numerous policies that Donald Trump implement that shake up global news, but also turn into the extemp speeches given at almost every single debate tournament. It's almost like Donald Trump's second goal for his second term is to make America and extemp great again. But recently, politicians have been less focused on the policies that Donald Trump has implemented and more focused on the promises that he's made. As CNBC finds just 7 months ago, Donald Trump promised that he would cut prices of oil drastically and make sure that oil prices would never rise again during his second term, and getting access from oil from OPEC countries, and making sure that it's clear that Americans will always have a large supply of oil at a very low cost. But it's when considering that John Astner, an analyst for the National Bureau of Economic Research, believes that any amount of change in the OPEC supply in a negative fashion will drastically increase the prices of oil, even up to 30% more than what we currently face. It becomes imperative that we look at today's hypothetical. Sebastian Assadi leaks evidence that the entirety of OPEC is having difficulty extracting oil, causing speculation and massive energy price increases. How should President Trump respond to quell panic and maintain price stability? And the answer is that he needs to calm markets and secure supply by first, releasing emergency reserves, second, shifting suppliers, and finally, third, using controlling and clear messaging. Despite the fact that America heavily relies on the OPEC, Donald Trump will need to use other reserves if he truly wants to maintain the oil market. And that's exactly why the first way in which he can calm markets and secure supply is by releasing emergency reserves. As the Reuters News finds on October 21st of this year, Donald Trump can release oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is a petroleum reserve located around the Gulf Coast, in which the U.S. constantly implements more and more oil in order to make sure that in a time of an emergency, we actually have a large supply of oil to stabilize the market. And this will be incredibly important in today's hypothetical. As the Forbes News finds just 1 month ago, the reserve is built to reduce the amount of fears and reduce speculative price surges, because Donald Trump can take large amounts of oil out of the reserve and continue to implement it back into American markets. And he's already shown initiative to doing so, as during his presidency, he's implemented nearly 1 million barrels of oil already in the past 7 months. And he's already stated that he plans to continue to do so. And because there's such a large supply of oil already available in the reserve, if America truly needs it, we can access from this material and plug it back into the market. So we have a short-term solution and more time to actually find a separate solution towards fixing and maintaining price stability. But in this extra time that Donald Trump is able to muster, he's going to have to find other solutions. And that's exactly why the second way in which he can calm markets and secure supply is by shifting the suppliers in which America gathers oil. As the EIA, or the Energy Information Administration, explains in a report in 2024, the US can easily rely on non-OPEC producers such as Canada to offset disruptions and stabilize prices, because there are still other ways in which the US can gather oil sustainably. And as the Council of Foreign Relations explains just last year, diversifying the oil supply will weaken the OPEC's market power, or the power that they have in the oil market, and it will help stabilize prices during global supply shocks, because Donald Trump and America can gather oil from other nations and make sure that it's clear that we actually have other ways to gather important materials. So Americans know that oil supply is not going to decrease and prices won't increase with it. And this becomes especially important because leaked information will be accessible to nearly everyone. And Donald Trump needs to make it obvious that they're actually using oil and they're actually gathering oil in a sustainable way. And that's finally why we have to have the third reason in which Donald Trump can calm markets and secure supply. He needs to use clear messaging. As Politico finds on April 2nd of this year, clear public communication, especially from the government, is very important in times of shock because Americans don't know what's happening and they often assume the worst. But if Donald Trump is able to use clear communication, he can make it obvious that they actually have alternatives to the issues they're currently in their current issues. As the New York Times explains on November 15th of this year, showing that you're prepared, especially when you're a government official, oftentimes allows more and more citizens to agree with your solutions and understand that you are actually going to find a way out of a problem. So if Donald Trump is able to show his preparedness and the alternatives that he's found towards American people, they're not going to have to fear about large increases in the price for oil markets, especially because panic is going to foster quickly. And Donald Trump needs to make it clear that they have solutions that will actually work and help Americans, not just increase prices and leave prices high and Americans very dry in the situation. So it's when considering that any changes in the OPEC supply will drastically increase the price of oil to rates that will be very unsustainable for Americans. It becomes imperative that we once again ask today's hypothetical. Sebastian Assadi leaks evidence that the entirety of OPEC is having difficulty extracting oil, causing speculation and massive energy price increases. How should President Trump respond to quell panic and maintain price stability? And the answer is that he needs to calm markets and secure supply by first, releasing emergency reserves, second, shifting suppliers, and finally, third, controlling his messaging towards millions of Americans. Donald Trump only has one more chance to make America great again. So it's clear that in today's hypothetical, he focuses on protecting Americans and showing his initiative, rather than leaving them confused and unknown on what the future will truly be, because he promised that oil prices would never be high. So in today's situation, he needs to take the initiative to make sure that this isn't a problem and that families can actually afford oil. Thank you.
Congratulations on a great speech. I just have a few questions. Now, on your first point, make this a quick, easy yes or no. Do you realize that in order to mobilize and sell off all the oil in the SPR, because of US current infrastructure, it would take months to refine it, move it, and sell it off? Do you know that?
Yeah, Donald Trump will have the opportunity to actually get oil out of the supply, and it'll show that he's taking initiative to actually make sure that oil is in the market.
But because of US infrastructure, it takes months to do that. We don't get any extra time from that. You know that, right?
Yeah, along with using other suppliers, Donald Trump can make sure that oil is still in the market, and he's showing initiative, especially with this clear communication.
Okay, sure. Let's just go with that. Let's go to your second point then. So you said that Donald Trump's going to go to other countries to get some oil, but let's be honest with me here. Is Mark Carney going to let Donald Trump go in and take his oil?
So it doesn't necessarily only have to be one country. There's numerous other nations that Donald Trump can use, and this will allow America to get oil. And even if it's a little bit more expensive, it's a more sustainable solution to waiting for OPEC to get more oil.
But is any other country going to let Trump come in and get their oil? Or is there even any other oil? Can you name a country that would let that happen?
Canada would allow that to happen if America is able to promote, America is able to sell higher prices.
Sure. Okay, let's go to your last point then. So you talked about how Donald Trump's going to have clear communications to the people, but make this clear for me. Is Donald Trump ever transparent or clear about when he makes statements and stuff to the people?
Okay, so the question is asking how should President Trump respond? It's not how can, it's asking how should. So I don't know if Donald Trump has done it in the past, but he should use clear communication because that's the only way which Americans can see that they're actually working towards a solution.
Sure, I would say yes, but I don't know if that's feasible right now. So we have 10 more seconds. I'm gonna go back to your first point again. So there's no infrastructure to mobilize oil, and so yes or no, you know that the oil in the SPR has to be refined overseas, right?
I'm sure you can tell me the answer to that.
Yeah, it has to be. So that means we can't. Do we get extra time from that?
We're not going to get as much extra time, but it shows that we have sustainability and that we actually have solutions to the problems that we're facing. Something that will allow for extra time for Americans to see that the market is stabilizing because there's more oil available.
Okay, that's end across. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our third speaker, Melinda Zhao, is answering the hypothetical. Kathan Desai travels to Malaysia, accidentally causing a viral outbreak. Kathan begins displaying ginger hair and transmitting a highly contagious pathogen which kills its host within a month of infection. With a new pandemic to fight, how should the World Health Organization respond?
Our world leaders definitely have great ways of addressing health issues. For instance, head of health secretary RFK Jr. is oftentimes criticized for what he thinks about medicine. For instance, he's known for being anti-vaccine and even claiming that vaccines cause autism. And honestly, I can't really blame him for being afraid of vaccines, because if I was named Kennedy, I'd also be afraid of shots. However, it seems that shots are definitely going to be fired internationally if our healthcare systems don't improve. Because, as the Christian Science Monitor explains on February 28th of this year, the World Health Organization is under the United Nations and was established in the 1900s with the goal of providing safe and reliable health care, as well as reducing pandemics and the harmful diseases from spreading in the future. However, as the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health finds on September 12th of 2024, it's only a matter of time before the next pandemic occurs, making it more likely that today's hypothetical can happen. So, when we consider that our last pandemic that we all know too well, the COVID-19 pandemic, led to over 3 million deaths worldwide, it's so that the World Health Organization doesn't repeat their mistakes that we need to consider today's rather long hypothetical. Captain Desai travels to Malaysia, accidentally causing a viral outbreak. Captain begins displaying ginger hair and transmitting a highly contagious pathogen which kills a host within a month of infection. With a new pandemic to fight, how should the World Health Organization respond? The answer is simple. The World Health Organization needs a comprehensive plan to reduce the risk of this disease spiraling out of control. More specifically, first, by investing into early detection. Secondly, coordinating international medical support. And third and finally, via research and development. But first, during the early 2020, President Donald Trump stated that COVID-19 wasn't going to be anything bad, and instead everyone was just exaggerating. It's clear that America's detection during that time wasn't too great, but luckily the World Health Organization can improve on this. That's why the first way that the World Health Organization can respond to a future pandemic is by investing into early detection. When there isn't enough early detection, it allows viruses to spread exponentially. In fact, the National Institute of Health found in a scholarly report in 2020 that every day without a new form of detection is just another way that viruses and other diseases can spread. But luckily, the World Health Organization can combat this because, as the American Hospital Association finds on August 11th of this year, that real-time data sharing and genomic surveillance, two methods of early detection, can be utilized by the World Health Organization. This allows them to be able to detect viruses and other pathogens early on, reducing the chances of an outbreak from spreading out of control. But secondly, when it comes to healthcare, teamwork can definitely make the dream work. And that's exactly why the second way that the World Health Organization should respond to a future pandemic is by coordinating international medical support. Specifically, right now we're seeing that when there isn't enough medical support internationally, it makes hotspots. In fact, as Reuters finds on August 17th of this year, this is because oftentimes underdeveloped nations that don't have enough medical support in the area instead have a large amount of transmission within the region. That's exactly why the World Health Organization needs to coordinate through this. As the Center for Strategic and International Studies finds just 1 month ago, if the World Health Organization coordinates to give international medical support towards developing nations, whether it's through health testing kits, vaccines, or other medications, it will allow them to be able to assist and be able to help these foreign countries to be able to battle a future disease. Ultimately, when other countries come together and the World Health Organization does bring them together, they can provide protection between them when there is a future pandemic. But third and finally, President Donald Trump during our last pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, suggested that the best way to solve the disease was to inject bleach into your skin. However, luckily, the World Health Organization can definitely research better solutions than this. That's exactly why the third and final way that the World Health Organization should respond to a future pandemic is supporting research and development. In fact, as the World Health Organization themselves explained just 6 days ago, Research and development, when there isn't enough of it, delays the process in making new vaccines and medication. And especially in a time where viruses can outbreak at a fast rate, it's critical for them to be able to research and develop a solution as fast as possible, as that would be the most beneficial for the public. And that's exactly why supporting research and development initiatives is so vital. In fact, as the Associated Press finds just 2 weeks ago, the way that the World Health Organization can support research and development is by allocating funds towards better projects that allow them to be able to research vaccinations at a quicker rate. By doing so and funding these projects, it allows research and development within other countries to be able to rapidly be explored, as well as being able to reduce the chances of an outbreak going too fast. By doing so, they're going to be able to solve the issues of future outbreaks by being able to combat these viruses and other pathogens easily. So, when we come back to consider the fact that our next pandemic is at the awakening and could only happen any day now, it becomes critical for us to consider today's hypothetical. Captain Desai travels to Malaysia, accidentally causing a viral outbreak. Captain begins displaying ginger hair and transmitting a highly contagious pathogen, which kills its host within a month of infection. With a new pandemic to fight, how should the World Health Organization respond? We saw that the answer is simple. The World Health Organization needs a comprehensive plan to prevent the pathogen from spiraling out of control, seen in three main ways. First, investing into early detection. Secondly, coordinating international medical support. And third and finally, supporting research and development. So, although our world leaders, just like RFK Jr., might be afraid of shots, it's clear that our World Health Organization needs to take a better shot at being able to prevent and tackle any future pandemic. Thank you.
That was a great speech, but I just have a couple questions. So, starting with your first point, how is the World Health Organization going to be able to afford early detection technology?
Well, first of all, I want to point out to the wording of the question. It says, how should the World Health Organization? Not exactly how can. But to answer your question directly, in order for them to invest into early detection, the World Health Organization's actually begun to do this, and they can actually work with other nations, such as the United States, in order to afford more biotechnology, as well as investing into these sectors to be able to research into being able to have early detection.
Yeah, that kind of leads me on to my second question about your second point and your also explanation for the previous question. Why would international nations want to support other countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, specifically, we saw in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, it wasn't just the country of China where the disease was born, but every single country was affected. If countries know that it's likely that a disease will spread to them, they're likely going to want to help other countries to prevent it from spreading to them as well. And this prevents the chance of a global pandemic like we've historically seen with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, and then finally, for your third point, would research and development take too long if this virus is so deadly that it's killing people in simply 1 month?
Well, to answer that, right now, if there isn't research and development, the World Health Organization wouldn't be able to create a proper solution, whether that being antibiotics, antivirals, depending on what this pathogen specifically is. If they're not researching that, they're never going to actually have a solution to end the pandemic once and for all. Because historically, we've seen that the best way to end pandemics, whether it being the flu pandemic, is to be able to have a vaccine or a permanent solution. If the World Health Organization doesn't research and develop, they're never going to make a proper solution to combating this disease.
Okay, that's time. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker will be Greta Kriston, answering the question. During the international broadcast of Crave Original Heated Rivalry, a leaked off-ice training video showing Andy Choi using performance-enhancing methods goes viral, prompting international debate over sports ethics and LGBTQ+ representation. What are the implications for athlete rights, media influence, and international sports diplomacy while protecting their artistic freedom?
It looks like at this time of the year, South Carolina isn't the only thing getting way too heated. So are Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov in HBO's #1 show, Heated Rivalry. Now, Variety magazine just 2 days ago highlights how important this show is culturally, because on one hand, it has one of the strongest LGBTQ representations, ever in the past few decades. However, it is also a strong social commentary on international relationships when it comes to sports. However, what you didn't expect watching this show is that Andy Choi is in the background being caught using performance enhancing drugs. And now, Andy, as an Eastern European person who also lived in Russia and is also obsessed with the Olympics, I understand. However, your actions have consequences far beyond yourself. It has a strong influence on LGBTQ America, especially under Trump's presidency, and in overall international relationships, especially with the 2026 Winter Olympics coming up. Therefore, it becomes imperative that we look at the complex implications of Andy Choi being caught using performance enhancing drugs in three key lenses. First is through athletes' rights, second is through media influence, and finally, through international sports diplomacy. Now, the first point that needs to be addressed is Andy himself, because he just got exposed to a career ending scandal. Now, the USADA on June 5th of this year explains how this is actually a lot more common than a lot of people think, because it's an issue of privacy versus accountability. A celebrity gets exposed for doing something without their consent. And while what they were doing was wrong, the way that it got leaked is still violating privacy laws, which puts the creators and heated rivalry in a difficult position. CNN expands on this on October 13th of this year, where they basically explain how, in this case, athletes have a right to protection and lawful ways to make sure that their entire career and reputation isn't completely ruined. However, in this case, the show Heated Rivalry would face a large lawsuit, which could heavily impact its representation and cultural impact that it has. Therefore, the first conflict and complexity that comes up with this scandal is the idea of being able to actually protect your rights and your privacy and stand up so you don't get defamed, but at the expense of a culturally significant show that is also just entertainment for everyone. The second complexity that this scandal reveals can be seen through media influence. Now, ABC News highlighted back in November of 2024 that majority of the things on social media and online are either misinformation or disinformation. And especially in today's society, there's a serious problem when it comes to people actually being researched and actually knowing what is going on, giving us the second complex issue, which comes from media influence and media literacy. Unfortunately for Andy, many people just saw what happened and they didn't really care to research anything. The clicks on the video were going up, however, research on it wasn't. The Market Law Journal explains on April 14th of this year how in this case, it is important for media and for the public to do their own investigation when it comes to scandals like this. Because in general, it is important for media to reveal wrongs like using performance enhancing drugs, but also at the same time, not everyone's interpretation of that could be the same or could be correct. And in that case, mis or disinformation is further spreading something that could be a career ending problem for Andy. And in that case, while the media was doing its job of exposing people's wrongdoings, the interpretation of it could be incorrect. And also, people may not be able to care or listen to others' perspectives when it comes to making judgments about Andy's actions. And the last thing that becomes complicated is international sports diplomacy. Now, as I mentioned previously, the 2026 Winter Olympics are coming up. And NPR highlighted back in 2022 how, for most countries, specifically split down, comparing the West to the East, have different interpretations when it comes to how performance enhancing drugs should or could be used. This was the exact situation that caused Russia to not be able to compete in the Olympics themselves. Now, since the show is broadcasted internationally and there are international interpretations socially of Andy using performance enhancing drugs, this could strain the relationships between Western countries like America, for example, and potentially Russian or other Asian countries towards the East who don't think it's as serious of a problem. ESPN overall explains this just 2 weeks ago, where they talked about how potentially for the upcoming Olympics, there have been discussions for stricter outlines when it comes to performance enhancing drugs. So, if this scandal got out, this could be another incentive or push towards that discussion and a push towards specific measures when it comes to international sports diplomacy. Because overall, protecting athletes' individual rights, even internationally and in mixed national teams, could be important when it comes to relationships. So today, when looking at Andy Choi's performance enhancing drug scandal, it becomes imperative that we understand the three complex areas that it sheds light on. First is individual rights and the idea of whether or not he is or should be able to legally protect himself from basically getting canceled. The second way is media influence and the highlighting of the lack of media literacy that is present in today's America and overall international community. And finally, the international sports relationships that are leading up to the 2026 Olympics. So while Andy Choi might have used performance enhancing drugs, he might have not. At the end of the day, everyone's interpretation and reaction is different. And that is what makes it so dangerous.
Just wanted to start off and say congratulations on a great speech. I just want to ask a few questions. So, in your first point, you mention and talk about athletes' rights. If this hypothetical were to happen, can you be more specific on what we'll actually see with athletes' rights? Are they going to increase, decrease, or anything specific?
So what happened, or what would happen, is that this would kind of set a precedent. As I mentioned in my speech, this is more common with like celebrities in general, not specifically athletes, where they get exposed for something and then they just get canceled without actual legal protection. Well, in athletes' case, it is a little bit more serious as there are drugs involved and it is their career, their athletic career that is involved. So this would mainly set a precedent as to how it is being interpreted by the public and as to how effective the legal protection that they get could be, especially when it comes to potentially canceling the show or asking them to cancel the show or suing the show, because it is, as I mentioned, such a culturally significant like pop culture thing that the athlete and if his legal team are working on protecting him but they cancel the show, that could just lead to more backlash. So it overall just highlights how complex like the legal problem is around the athlete.
Okay, thank you. Your second point, you talked about media and influence. You mentioned misinformation. Can you be more specific on, in the scandal of Andy, if misinformation is only going to increase in the future or decrease? What's the specific implication of what you talked about?
So I'm pretty sure either way, misinformation and disinformation are just going to increase in our world, especially with the rise of AI and like AI getting harder to detect. But like in this case, it well could have been a possibility that the performance enhancing drug he was used was prescribed or it was just like a little questionable training method. The issue is that people aren't really actually thinking and researching any of this. They just jump to conclusions. And if this happens moving on into the future, it's the same thing is going to happen over and over again.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our fifth speaker will be Andrew Liu, answering the question. As Anthony Babu returns to his homeland, Tamil Nadu immediately secedes from India, and Anthony ascends to the presidency with no residual conflict between the newly formed nation and India. As Prime Minister, what steps should Anthony take to grow Tamil Nadu into a thriving nation?
In the 1990s, goats of basketball such as Michael Jordan stepped onto court. People asked who would win. But the true question wasn't that. It was by how much. For other goats like Serena Williams, when she stepped onto court, brackets felt like formalities. But for goats like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, winning elections was called inevitable. But there's one goat that makes immortal goats like those mortal. Anthony Babu, NSDA two-time national champion, executive director of the Equality in Forensics. However, unfortunately, there's pressing news. Just 5 minutes ago, the Katie Gorman Times, a internationally recognized Times, explained that after slandering President Donald Trump a little too hard in his last speech in 2025, President Donald Trump effectively did his deportation policy. And unfortunately, that means that Anthony Babu is now in his hometown of Tamil Nadu, where he swiftly won elections just like his national championship. Fortunately, the Hindustan Times reported this time on June 17th of 2025 that the province of Tamil Nadu, or now nation, has 75 million people and a GDP of 420 billion. But behind all that glory, unfortunately, it's still a province that just seceded. So there's major issues. And that's why international experts are wondering if it can survive and how Anthony Babu can make it survive. However, considering the fact that the Journal of Democracy revealed this time a mere 3 days ago that countries that succeed usually have a 67% chance of failing, it's for the sake of Anthony and our community where we must ask today's question. As Anthony Babu returns to his homeland, Tamil Nadu immediately secedes from India, and Anthony ascends to the presidency with no residual conflict between the newly formed nation and India. As Prime Minister, what steps should Anthony take to grow Tamil Nadu into a thriving nation? It's clear that there is steps that he can take, and that is namely by establishing a comprehensive plan that prioritizes sustainability and stability for the newly formed nation in 3 key ways. First, by establishing a military. Second, by solving climate issues and environmental issues. And finally, by diversifying its economy. Now you see, extempors are not entirely known for being extremely strong, nor are they extremely known for being brave. Fortunately for Anthony Babu, he can create an army out of his own province, making it the first way on what Anthony Babu should do to ensure that Tamil Nadu is a thriving nation. In fact, in Harvard political scientist Samuel Huntington's most renowned book, The Soldier and the State, he explains the problem that many times when nations secede, they fail mainly primarily due to they don't have an actual military. Fortunately for Tamil Nadu, it has the infrastructure to support the military, but no one actually in the military, because when it secedes, its military remains with India. Al Jazeera makes it even worse, explaining on June 14th of 2025 that not only does it have no military, but more importantly, young men in Tamil Nadu oftentimes don't go into the military, making its percentage already a lot lower. However, the RAND Corporation explains the perfect solution set up on September 4th of 2025 for Anthony specifically, that he can ensure that there's an actual military by providing real economic benefits, something that Tamil Nadu already has by creating a pension system, real scholarships, and providing real payment for these military members. Immediately, thousands of young men will flee to the military for economic benefits. And that can ensure that Anthony Babu will have a strongman rule just like Kim Jong-un. However, the second, reason on what Anthony Babu can do to ensure that Tamil Nadu is actually a thriving nation is by addressing climate issues. Now, principally, Anthony Babu has a rather famous punchline, and that is, if President Donald Trump is like, if the Lorax didn't speak for trees. Now, if Anthony Babu wants to truly be the Lorax that speaks for trees, he needs to take up the second method. In fact, the India Development Bank in review reveals on just January of this year that right now Tamil Nadu has major climate and environmental issues. coupled with air quality issues from northern India and cyclones and climates and droughts from southern India, it has made nearly 2 million people in the entire Indian subcontinent die every single year directly from air pollution. However, there's a great solution to that. The Lowy Institute, a national think tank based off of in Australia, explained this time on July 14th of 2025 that Anthony Babu can ensure that his nation is thriving by ensuring that there's sustainable and green infrastructure that would reduce the amount of pollution and to ensure that actual infrastructure can withstand the hurricanes battering his country. In return, the Harvard Kennedy Review revealed just merely 1 month ago that would not only benefit its people and its economy, but ensure that infant and maternal health in the nation would be truly sustainable. However, President Donald Trump has made some bold statements in the before, such as Epstein files doesn't exist, or now that economic downturn is a good idea. However, Anthony Babu needs to differentiate himself with President Donald Trump as the world's largest D1 hater. So therefore, he must take up the third reason on ensuring that how the nation of Tamil Nadu can be thriving in the future is by diversifying its economy. The Peterson Institute of International Economics explained this time on June of 2024 that the issue with the current nations such as Tamil Nadu that are just seceding is that their economy was too dependent on nations like India and nations before. Fortunately, there is a solution to that by establishing its own currency, trade system, and more importantly, granting visas so more and more people will come and benefit its economy. Not only can Anthony Babu ensure that economic growth would actually happen, but the Pew Research Center would show that in just January of this year, that it would prevent his nation from failing by nearly 90%. It's clear that right now, our world leaders are getting one better one. So returning to today's question, as Anthony Babu returns to homeland, Tamil Nadu immediately secedes from India. Anthony ascends to the presidency with no residual conflict between the newly formed nation and India. As prime minister, what steps should Anthony take to grow Tamil Nadu as a thriving nation? The answer is by establishing a comprehensive plan that prioritizes sustainability and stability in 3 key ways. First, by establishing his own military. Second, by solving the climate issues. And finally, by diversifying his economy. It's clear that while goats like MJ, Serena, and FDR may have reigned for their time, but Anthony Babu is the only one that can reign forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good job on a good speech. I just have a few questions. So in your first point, you mentioned that he can just like create an army. How
Yes.
long would that take? Like your entire plan, how long would it take?
Okay, so if Anthony Babu actually takes this point into heart and actually establishes like a military through the processes I told you about, which is specifically like providing economic incentives, pensions, and actual a military system, then it's very clear that his military could gain like hundreds of thousands of young men that actually want economic benefits in merely weeks. That means that like you can see multiple examples of this happening in the past, where when militaries actually want more people within weeks of actually providing economic benefit, this happens. So that would be like the rough timeline.
And then kind of the same concern is there with your second point also, but even more intensely. So you talked about how like Anthony is going to start green infrastructure.
Right.
Can he do that, just build like Tamil Nadu's resources without any
Yes,
international help?
absolutely. I mentioned before that Tamil Nadu has a GDP of 420 billion, but more importantly, it's also one of the richest Indian states. So Anthony is in good hands, except the issue is it was a province and now must establish itself as a nation. So if it wants to truly thrive, then it needs to ensure that like the climate issues won't be a problem 50 years down the line, and something that he can solve right now, starting now.
Okay, and then on your third point, do you have any kind of alternative? Because the main solution that you provided for the economy was that people are going to get visas and go. However, Tamil Nadu's population density is already extremely high. So to what extent would that solution be successful?
Okay, so there's two responses to that issue. I think nations such as like cities like Tokyo can sustain a high population density. So I don't think that should be much of a concern as long as they bring economic benefit. But also that I provided other solutions, such as creating a Federal Reserve and also making its own currency, which is also diversifying its economy and establishing a real economy.
Thank you so much.
Our sixth speaker, Navmika Anish, will be answering the hypothetical. Katie Gorman, victim to her own inability to read and write, accidentally massively increases IMF interest rates against Zimbabwe, triggering a renewed financial crisis. How should Zimbabwean leaders respond to correct the nation's impending financial collapse?
For the past decade, Zimbabwe has been experiencing financial issues, and their economy is extremely unstable. And this is for multiple reasons. Some key factors being currency volatility, high interest rates, and inflation. Now, these are all factors that prove that their economy is struggling. But if another crisis were to occur, they would only collapse. Now, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, plays a key part in all of this. It's supposed to help economies grow and stabilize by personalizing lending terms and interest rates. However, it seems like a mistake has occurred, as Katie Gorman has made a mistake that has led the IMF to increase interest rates against Zimbabwe, which is only going to hurt their economy. This is why it's imperative today that we answer the question, how should Zimbabwean leaders respond to correct the nation's impending financial collapse? The answer can be seen through three key ways. First, immediate economic stabilization. Second, renegotiation. And lastly, restore public trust. So first, immediate economic stabilization. As I've already stated, Zimbabwe's economy is crumbling, and through this mistake, it's only getting worse. But Zimbabwean leaders were to take immediate action, they would actually be able to stop the crisis before they hit rock bottom. As Reuters News finds, on November of 2025, Zimbabwe has already experiencing high inflation since early 2025, and the inflation peaked in January of 2025, and it was driven by food and housing costs. Now, these crises are only going to increase by this mistake. However, if Zimbabwe was to take immediate financial action to stabilize their economy, they would be able to better the situation without it getting too out of hand. And they can take these actions through multiple ways. One key factor being reducing government spending by taking away anything unnecessary unnecessary to the economy, such as travel, discretionary contracts, and such as. Now, for this to happen, the government needs to take the first step so the people can follow behind. This is where Zimbabwean leaders need to take the first step so that their people can follow behind as a good role model. Secondly, The Guardian finds on December of 2025, at the end of 2024, the total public debt was 23.3 billion USD, which translates to around 72.9% of Zimbabwe's GDP. This already shows that they're in extreme debt, and high interest rates are only going to worsen this. But by stopping unnecessary transactions and financial exchanges, the Zimbabwean leaders will be able to better the situation and taking immediate economic actions to stabilize the economy. This is why taking immediate economic stabilization actions will help their economy not collapse. Secondly, renegotiation. Reuters News finds on November of 2024, Zimbabwe has already collaborating with the IMF when it comes to create sound policy. In fact, they're seeking a $2.6 billion bridge financing agreement that's to help them by mid-2026. But the thing is that this crisis happened because of IMF. So Zimbabwe can take this into their advantage. Instead of seeing the situation as something to avoid, they can take it as a way to keep the IMF accountable for their actions and their mistake. Now, the IMF is an extremely credible and reputable organization. However, Zimbabwe will be able to take this into their own advantage by holding them accountable for their mistake. If other nations were to see how Zimbabwe's economy were to collapse because of IMF's mistakes, of course they're going to be wary of IMF, and of course their reputation is going to be destroyed as well. This is why Zimbabwe can use this as a leveraging tool when it comes to renegotiating for higher and better prices for themselves. Secondly, IMF themselves stated on October of 2025, IMF projects around a 6% total GDP growth for Zimbabwe over the next few years. But the problem is that this crisis is going to completely change that. And instead of growth, it'll be a huge decline. And this is where renegotiation comes into account again. When Zimbabwean leaders are going to renegotiate with the IMF, they'll be able to have better interest rates for themselves and better lending terms as well. This will only help Zimbabwe. In the long term, it'll only be something that'll help. But if Zimbabwe doesn't take this into account, they're going to be taking out on a missed opportunity. This is why renegotiation is going to play a key factor when it comes to helping the economy stay stabilized. Lastly, restoring public trust. The World Bank found on October of 2025, by mid-2025, Zimbabwe was projected to have high fiscal and monetary rates, and which is all policies which all happen. But this all shows that the inflation crisis is only increasing, and this is where public trust plays a key factor. It's well known that people are more likely to spend into their economy if they know that they can trust their economy. And although this crisis is an exact situation where it seems like you can't trust them, if the Zimbabwean leaders were to be more transparent about the issue and outline where everything went wrong and whose fault it really is, where it's IMF's fault, they'll be able to restore public trust, which will only help the economy. Because once public trust is restored, more and more people are willing to put into the economy. Secondly, NPR finds on November of 2025, Zimbabwe has reached all-time inflation rates, where there was hyperinflation in 2008 over 500%. This is an extreme case which could happen again due to this crisis. But the thing is that this is also an example where we can see that not only was this as an economically trying time, this was also a politically and socially difficult time for Zimbabwe, which directly correlates to their economy. When people lose confidence in their government and their economy, they lose confidence in what they're spending their money on, leading them to spend less money and to have less economic growth and activity occurring all around. This is why restoring public trust is a key factor that they should take when it comes to stabilizing the economy. So today, when faced with the question, how should Zimbabwean leaders respond to correct the nation's impending financial collapse? The answer can be seen through three key ways. First, immediate economic stabilization. Second, renegotiation, and lastly, restoring public trust.
So, great speech, first of all. Let's first look at your first point, where my first concern actually reaches. So, when you're talking about government spending cuts, right? Unnecessary. Who decides what counts as unnecessary, and how quickly can these cuts be actually implemented?
I think the main part about this is that these unnecessary cuts are known to be unnecessary. As I stated, travel is a huge one. Now, that's an unnecessary spending that the government doesn't need to have. And when it comes to time, that has to be taken more into account with what the crisis situation will be and how bad it would be.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering the question. Let's move on to the second point about keeping the IMF accountable and renegotiation. So, is it commonly known that the IMF is truly accountable and good as you say in your speech?
The IMF has stated themselves, of course, that's not something that's to each to interpret, but they have stated themselves that their goal is to be able to have lending terms and interest rates that help each economy personally.
Okay,
so that's what they're trying
perfect.
to do.
So one just other question on that same line of reasoning, right? So what leverage does Zimbabwe actually bring to the negotiation table when they're negotiating with IMF?
Well, if their economy was to collapse, then other surrounding nations and other international powers would see this, and they would also take that into account when it comes to further collaboration with the IMF on their own.
Okay, perfect. And finally, on your last point, on restoring public trust, how does restoring trust actually convince international leaders to lower interest rates?
Well, it's more when it comes to international leaders, that's not what my point was about. But what I meant by public trust is to restore trust in the public themselves. So the Zimbabwean citizens who are being impacted by this crisis, not international leaders and interest rates. That's not what my point was about.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.